It was a story that gripped the nation, a seemingly perfect mother, a picture-perfect family, and a YouTube empire built on the foundation of strict parenting and unwavering faith. But behind the polished videos and the carefully curated smiles, lurked a darkness no one could have imagined. For years, Ruby Franke preached discipline, obedience, and sacrifice to millions of devoted followers. She called it tough love. She called it good parenting. But her children? They knew it by another name, abuse. The woman who once stood as a beacon of parental wisdom would become a symbol of horror, a mother whose iron grip led not only to suffering but to an unraveling so shocking, it changed the laws meant to protect children forever. This is the rise and fall of Ruby Franke. A story of control. A story of manipulation. A story of suffering that went unnoticed, until one child, starving, bruised, and desperate, escaped. And in that moment, the world finally saw the truth. But before we uncover the horrifying details of Ruby Franke's crimes, we must go back. Back to where it all began. To the moment she first turned on a camera, and began shaping the perfect illusion. A mother of 6, living in the quiet town of Springville, Utah, Ruby Franke seemed to have it all. A devoted husband, beautiful children, and a deep-rooted faith in the teachings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But it wasn't just her family that saw her as an example. The world did too. In 2015, Ruby and her husband, Kevin, launched their YouTube channel, 8 Passengers. What started as innocent family vlogs, morning routines, homeschooling tips, and heartfelt family moments, quickly grew into something much bigger. Millions tuned in daily to watch what they believed was the perfect Mormon family. But perfection, as they would soon learn, comes at a cost. As the channel grew, so did Ruby's control. What was once a simple documentation of family life became a stage where discipline, humiliation, and harsh punishments were put on display for the world to see. Don't forget to subscribe for more gripping stories, like this video to support the channel. A child punished for forgetting their lunch, by being denied food. A young boy forced to sleep on a beanbag for months, because his bed was taken away as a lesson. A little girl made to sit outside in the freezing cold, for failing to obey. And each time the audience expressed concern, Ruby had the same response. This is love. This is good parenting. This is what children need. But as the years went on, that defense became harder and harder to believe. More and more people began to question her methods. Former fans turned into critics. Child advocacy groups raised alarms. Yet, the videos continued. The punishments became harsher. And Ruby? She grew bolder, unapologetic, unwavering in her belief that she was right. But what no one knew, what no one saw, was that behind the camera, things were far worse than anyone imagined. And then, one day, everything changed. A frantic knock on a neighbor's door. A child, malnourished, bruised, and desperate, pleading for help. And within hours, Ruby Franke's carefully constructed world came crashing down. Police arrived at a home in Ivins, Utah, where they found more than just one victim. Another child, in similar condition, restrained, starved, and terrified. It was no longer just online speculation. No longer just concerned viewers wondering if something was wrong. The truth was out. Ruby Franke was arrested. Charged. Convicted. And as the nation watched in horror, a question echoed in the minds of millions: how did this happen? How did a woman who built her brand on faith and family, become a monster in her own home? And more importantly, how many more children were suffering behind the screens of family vloggers just like her? The case of Ruby Franke didn't just expose one woman's crimes, it exposed a system. A world where children are filmed, profited from, and used as content without their consent. But this time, something changed. In the wake of the scandal, lawmakers in Utah took action. A new law was passed, ensuring that children featured in social media content had rights. The right to their earnings. the right to their privacy. And most importantly, the right to be protected. Kevin Franke, once a silent figure in the background of Ruby's vlogs, stood before lawmakers with a chilling admission. Children cannot give informed consent to be filmed on social media, period. Vlogging my family, putting my children into public social media, was wrong, and I regret it every day. Regret. Guilt. Too little, too late. The story of Ruby Franke is not just about one mother's downfall. It is about an industry that, for too long, has turned children into products, their lives into entertainment, their suffering into content. And now, the world is watching. Because if there's one thing this case has taught us, it's that behind every perfect family vlog, behind every curated clip of joy and laughter, there might be a darker story waiting to be uncovered. And the question remains: how many more? It was the escape that shattered the illusion. For years, millions had watched the Franke children grow up on YouTube, their lives laid bare for entertainment. But behind the polished family vlogs, behind the carefully curated moments of joy, laughter, and discipline, something sinister was unfolding. Something no one, not even the most critical of viewers, could have imagined. And then, a boy, 12 years old, starved, bruised, and desperate, found his way to freedom. August 30th, 2023. Ivins, Utah. A frantic knock on a neighbor's door in the dead of night. The woman who answered was not prepared for what she saw. A child, skin pale, eyes hollow, his body frail from malnourishment. His wrists and ankles raw, wrapped in bloody duct tape. His voice weak, but urgent. He had escaped. He needed help. And inside that house, his little sister was still trapped. The neighbor didn't hesitate. She called 911. And when the police arrived, they uncovered a horror that defied comprehension. Inside the dark, eerily silent home of Jody Hildebrandt, they found 9-year-old Eve. She wasn't running. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't even crying. She was sitting in a dark closet, legs crossed, her tiny frame barely visible in the dim light. Her hair, once golden and long, was now completely shaved off. For hours, officers pleaded with her to come out. She refused. What had been done to these children? What had they endured behind these walls? And how had no one seen it until now? The arrest of Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrandt sent shockwaves across the country. The mother who had once prided herself on her strict but loving parenting techniques was now exposed as a woman who had tortured her own children in the name of discipline. And yet, the deeper investigators dug, the more disturbing the truth became. Once upon a time, Ruby Franke had been just another mommy vlogger, sharing her family's daily life with millions. But in 2022, everything changed. She walked away from her thriving YouTube channel, 8 Passengers, and into the arms of someone even more extreme, Jody Hildebrandt, a so-called therapist with radical views on obedience, sin, and punishment. Under Hildebrandt's influence, Ruby abandoned her husband. She took her 2 youngest children and moved them into Hildebrandt's secluded home in southern Utah. The outside world barely noticed. What they didn't know was that inside those walls, the children were being broken down, one agonizing day at a time. Jody Hildebrandt preached suffering as salvation. She convinced Ruby that her children were tainted by sin. That they needed to be purged. That starvation, restraint, and humiliation were not abuse, but a path to righteousness. And Ruby believed her. What the children endured at the hands of these women defied reason. Russell, the 12-year-old boy who escaped, later revealed to investigators the extent of their torment. He had been tied down, his limbs bound to heavy weights on the ground, preventing him from moving. His wounds, open and festering, were treated with a mixture of cayenne pepper and honey, a sadistic form of healing designed to inflict excruciating pain. He had gone days without food, his body growing weaker, his mind slipping into despair. And his little sister, Eve? She had been locked away in darkness, starved, her identity stripped from her as her hair was shaved off. And through it all, Ruby Franke wrote in her journal. She documented her cruelty in chilling detail. She believed her son was possessed by the devil, that the torture she inflicted was the only way to save him. She recorded months of daily abuse. The starvation. The labor under the scorching sun. The punishments designed to purify her children's souls. She believed she was doing God's work. But the law saw it for what it was. A crime. A monstrous, inexcusable crime. When Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrandt were arrested, the world recoiled in horror. Two women, one a mother, the other a therapist, had convinced themselves that the suffering of children was justified. That obedience was worth any price. But now, they would pay the price. Their trial was swift. The evidence was undeniable. The court did not see strict parenting. It saw torture. It did not see discipline. It saw evil. The verdict, guilty. And the sentence? Up to 30 years in prison. But for the children they left behind, no sentence could undo the years of suffering. No prison cell could erase the scars, physical, emotional, and psychological, that would follow them for a lifetime. After her mother's arrest, Sherry Franke, the eldest of the Franke children, broke her silence. For years, she had been the quiet observer, the child who grew up knowing that something was deeply, terribly wrong. But now, she was ready to speak. In a memoir, she described how her mother's obsession with striking content gold had turned their lives into a production. She wasn't a child. She was an employee. Her siblings weren't family. They were props. Her mother wasn't a nurturer. She was a director, controlling, orchestrating, and punishing when necessary, all in the name of perfect content. Sherry recalled the cameras that never turned off. The constant surveillance. The punishments. The fear. And then, the moment she knew her childhood was over. She was 6 years old. She disobeyed. Her mother slapped her across the face. Hard. For years, she kept quiet. Convinced herself it was normal. But now, she knows the truth. She was never a daughter. She was a victim. And she wasn't alone. The fall of Ruby Franke was not just the story of one woman's descent into madness. It was a mirror, held up to an industry built on the exploitation of children. An industry where parents turn their families into brands. Where children grow up with a camera in their face, their most private moments sold to millions. Where discipline turns into punishment. Where love turns into control. Where childhood turns into content. And now, the world is watching. Utah has passed a law. Other states are following. For the first time, the question is being asked, how many more children are suffering behind the screens of family vloggers? How many more are prisoners in their own homes? And how many more will it take, before this industry is finally held accountable? Because if there's one thing we've learned from the tragic, horrifying case of Ruby Franke, it's that monsters don't just hide in the dark. Sometimes, they smile for the camera. It started with family vlogs, heartwarming, picture-perfect moments shared with millions. But behind the carefully edited videos, behind the smiling faces, a different reality lurked. A reality so dark, so twisted, that it would take years before the truth finally surfaced. And when it did, the world was horrified. Now, in the wake of one of the most disturbing cases of child abuse ever exposed on social media, lawmakers are taking action. Don't forget to subscribe for more gripping stories, like this video to support the channel. But the question remains, how many more children have suffered behind the lens of a camera? How many more parents have traded their children's privacy, dignity, and safety for views, likes, and cash? And how many more will it take, before the cycle is finally broken? In Utah, a new law has been passed, one that finally acknowledges a harsh, undeniable truth. Children of social media influencers have no control over their own lives. For years, kids have been exploited for profit, their childhoods transformed into content without their consent. Now, under this new legislation, online creators who make more than $150,000 a year from content featuring their children will be required to set aside 15% of those earnings into a trust fund. A small step toward justice, a small safeguard against the financial abuse so many children have endured. But will it be enough? Will it be enough to undo the years of stolen privacy, the trauma of growing up under constant scrutiny, the reality that their most vulnerable moments were sold to the highest bidder? As Utah lawmakers debated this bill, the world was still reeling from the truth about Ruby Franke. And then, another shockwave. A new Hulu documentary, Devil in the Family, The Fall of Ruby Franke, reignited public outrage, peeling back the layers of manipulation, abuse, and twisted ideology that fueled one of the most disturbing cases in recent memory. The documentary, a chilling 3-part deep dive, features never-before-seen footage, damning testimony, and raw confessions from the very people who once lived inside the nightmare. Her estranged husband, Kevin Franke. Her eldest daughter, Sherry. Her son, Chad. For the first time, they tell the full story of what it was like to live under Ruby Franke's rule. And the truth? It's worse than anyone could have imagined. In the aftermath of Ruby Franke's arrest, her family was quick to distance themselves from the woman who had once been their sister, daughter, and mother. Her sisters, Julie Griffiths-Daru and Bonnie Hoeline, both social media influencers themselves, rushed to release statements. They claimed they had no idea about the abuse. That Ruby had separated from the family years ago. That whatever she had done to her children, they hadn't seen it coming. Even her own parents, Chad and Jennifer Griffiths, refused to stand by her. In a courtroom statement, they described their brief, fractured communications with Ruby in the years leading up to her arrest. They had barely spoken to her. And in those rare conversations, they were met with a woman they no longer recognized. A woman who accused them of things that never happened. A woman who spoke in delusions, in paranoia, in madness. Their daughter was gone. Consumed by an ideology so extreme, so warped, that they had no way to bring her back. And then, there was Kevin Franke. The man who once stood beside Ruby, who once built a life with her, who once believed in the family they had created. Now, he stood in a courtroom, fighting for his children. He had filed for divorce immediately after Ruby's arrest. But the damage had already been done. The state had taken custody of his children, the same children who had suffered under their mother's rule. Now, he faced the unthinkable, a legal battle to prove he could be the father they deserved. At a recent hearing, Kevin read heartbreaking statements from 2 of his daughters, one 16, the other just 11 years old. Statements pleading with lawmakers to protect children like them from ever suffering the same fate. And then, the most gut-wrenching testimony of all. A letter from Eve Franke, the youngest child. The little girl who had been locked in a dark closet, her head shaved, her body frail from starvation. The little girl who had sat there, silent, as police begged her to come out. In her own words, she told the world what needed to change. I'm not saying YouTube is a bad thing. Sometimes it brings us together. But kids deserve to be loved. Not used by the ones that are supposed to love them the most. For years, Ruby Franke sold an illusion. She painted a picture of wholesome family life, of strict but loving parenting, of discipline and faith. And the world believed it. Millions tuned in. Millions watched. Millions supported her. But behind the curtain, her children were suffering. And now, in the wake of her downfall, one terrifying question remains: how many more family vloggers are hiding the same dark secret? How many more children are being disciplined into silence? How many more parents see dollar signs instead of sons and daughters? Ruby Franke is in prison. Her influence is gone. But the industry that enabled her, that rewarded her, that funded her cruelty? It still thrives. And the children trapped inside it? They are still waiting to be saved. At first glance, the Franks seemed like the epitome of wholesome, all-American life, a devout Mormon family raising 6 children in Utah, documenting their daily routines, homeschooling adventures, and parenting philosophies. Millions tuned in to watch. Millions adored them. But behind the carefully edited vlogs, behind the smiles, the coordinated outfits, the wholesome family bonding, a much darker reality was unfolding. And when the truth finally came out, it was more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. Before the world knew her as a convicted child abuser, Ruby Franke was a beloved momfluencer. With an infectious energy and a seemingly unwavering devotion to faith and family, she captured the hearts of millions of followers on her YouTube channel, 8 Passengers. The channel, launched in 2015, quickly became one of YouTube's biggest family vlogs. It offered an intimate, behind-the-scenes look at the Franks' lives, showcasing their unique, and often controversial, parenting style. But while her fans saw a dedicated mother raising her children with firm discipline, others saw something much more disturbing. Over time, concerned viewers began noticing red flags. Stories of extreme punishments, public humiliation, and questionable discipline tactics surfaced in her videos. Some of the most disturbing moments included her then 15-year-old son Chad being forced to sleep on a beanbag for 7 months as a punishment. Her 6-year-old daughter Eve going to school with no lunch because, in Ruby's words, she needs to learn from the natural outcome. Threats to throw away her children's most treasured possessions unless they could buy them back with cash or labor. Viewers were horrified. They started voicing their concerns in the comments. A Change.org petition was created, calling for Child Protective Services, CPS, to intervene. And in June 2020, CPS did investigate the Franke household. But when authorities found no immediate evidence of neglect, the case was closed. And Ruby? She laughed it off. To Ruby, discipline wasn't just about teaching her children responsibility, it was a way of life. Over the years, her parenting philosophy became increasingly extreme. And when she met Jody Hildebrandt, a self-proclaimed life coach and founder of the controversial mental health program Connections, things took an even darker turn. Jody reinforced Ruby's belief that strict discipline was necessary, not just for raising good children, but for saving their souls. Under Jody's influence, Ruby became obsessed with the idea that her children were inherently sinful. She began writing disturbing entries in her personal journal, convinced that her own child was possessed by the devil. One passage read, "My son slithers and sneaks around looking for opportunities when no one is watching. He is satanic." Another entry revealed how she saw her role as a parent: "My children must be broken. They must feel pain before they can be redeemed." What began as harsh discipline soon escalated into full-fledged abuse. And no one, not her husband, not her family, not her YouTube followers, could stop what was coming next. By 2022, Ruby had cut ties with her husband, Kevin Franke. Under Jody's guidance, she moved her 2 youngest children into Hildebrandt's home, a secluded property in southern Utah. It was there that the real nightmare began. For months, Russell, 12, and Eve, 9, endured unimaginable cruelty. They were starved until they were skeletal. They were beaten as punishment. They were forced to sleep on the floor for weeks at a time. They were tied up, bound with duct tape, and gagged if they disobeyed. And worst of all, Ruby believed she was doing the right thing. She thought she was saving them. She thought she was purifying their souls. But then, Russell escaped. On August 30th, 2023, a frantic 12-year-old boy appeared at a neighbor's doorstep in Ivins, Utah. He was emaciated, his ribs jutting out from his skin. His wrists and ankles were wrapped in bloody duct tape. His voice shook as he begged for help. The neighbor, horrified by what they saw, immediately called 911. When officers arrived, they found Eve sitting cross-legged in a dark closet, her head shaved, her body frail. At first, she refused to speak. It took hours to coax her out. When police arrived at the house, they found a chilling scene, a home that looked more like a prison than a place for children. Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrandt were immediately arrested. At first, they denied everything. But then, the evidence surfaced. Police found handwritten journals detailing months of abuse. In her own words, Ruby described, starving her children for days at a time, tying them up to weights on the floor, dressing their open wounds with cayenne pepper and honey, shaving her daughter's head as a form of punishment. There was no escaping the truth now. The trial was swift. Both Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrandt were sentenced to up to 30 years in prison. And as they sat in the courtroom, hearing their fate, there was no sign of remorse. In the wake of the trial, the Franke family was shattered. Kevin Franke, who had long been silent, filed for divorce and fought for custody of his remaining children. Ruby's oldest daughter, Sherry Franke, published a memoir exposing the dark reality of her childhood. Her words painted a chilling portrait of a mother who was more obsessed with content creation than love, more devoted to punishment than compassion. And in Utah, lawmakers took action. A new bill was passed, requiring social media creators who profit off their children to set aside money for them, a direct response to the exploitation Ruby had built her empire on. But the damage was already done. And as the world watched Ruby Franke fade into infamy, one chilling truth remained: she wasn't the only one. Because for every Ruby Franke, there are hundreds of parents turning their children into content. For every 8 passengers, there are countless family vloggers profiting off their kids' lives. And for every Russell and Eve, there are children still suffering in silence, waiting for someone to finally see the truth. In February 2024, Ruby pleaded guilty to 4 felony counts of aggravated child abuse and was sentenced to up to 30 years in prison. Her oldest daughter, Sherry, who had long cut ties with her mother, posted just one word on social media: finally. Ruby Franke, once a beloved internet mother, now sits behind bars. If you enjoyed this deep dive into true crime, make sure to subscribe for more gripping stories, like this video to support the channel, and comment below with your thoughts. What case should we cover next? Stay tuned for more chilling mysteries.